Hello and welcome to Unlapped. Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Katie George back, Laurence Edmondson, Nate Saunders as always. So good to be with you guys. Let's catch up. I know that those curtains are not your own. Where are you, Laz?
I am in Jeddah. I arrived this morning on an overnight flight from London. By the way, Casey, great to have you back. Of course, Nicole was on holiday this weekend, but great to have you back. So I just arrived in Jeddah. I had kind of a weekend off because Nate was in Bahrain and I wasn't. But I managed to get myself down to the Goodwood racing circuit, which for anyone in the UK or if you're visiting the UK, fantastic place to go and visit, especially in spring and September when they have racing there. It's brilliant. So I've kind of been having an easy week and now I'm about to get back into the swing of it.
Yeah, and it's going to be exciting, obviously, with what happened a weekend ago. Nate, have you slept for 48 hours after your tour around the world?
I have, yeah. So I got back from Bahrain on Monday. I made the stupid mistake of sitting down on my sofa and thinking, I'm just going to close my eyes for a second and just think about the world. And then I woke up several hours later and everything was ruined, all my plans to sleep. But I feel all right now. And yeah, I'm basically doing what Laurence was doing last week, which is being back at base while Laurence is out there. So nice to get back because I think I counted it was about 36 days on the road, which was a great time. But it was nice to get back into my own bed and make coffee with my own kettle and stuff like that. So enjoying it.
Yeah, when you first get to a hotel, it's like kind of new, exciting. You want to get out. And then by day, probably, I think 14, 15, I'd be over the hotels. I don't know where your threshold is, but it gets old.
It got old quite quickly. And the thing is with hotels, and this for people who are listening who don't travel much, that this is what they hate about journalists talking about this, right? But Bahrain actually was quite good for that because in Japan, one of the few downsides about Japan is the hotel rooms are tiny. You basically have a bed, a desk, and that's it. And in Bahrain, I had this massive kind of one of these apartment hotel rooms, so that was actually quite nice. So I can't even the hotel front. Bahrain, I was kind of spoilt for what I had. But yeah, nothing beats the sound of the key going into your own door, opening the door up and being home. That's quite a nice feeling.
Well, welcome back. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, like this video, leave us a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to ESPN for more F1 content. That's the new ESPN F1 channel for all things F1 all season long. And of course, hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. We greatly appreciate it. All right, let's take a look at some of the questions our producers set up for us this week. There's an old saying out there, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think it's fair to say there's a lot of smoke right now at Red Bull. Max Verstappen does not seem thrilled with how things are going to start the season. Helmut Marko then was asked about it, and he said the following in regards to concern about Max possibly leaving in the future. Marko said, "The concern is great. As I said, improvements have to come in the near future so that he has a car with which he can win again." I'm curious. We know that Marko obviously is very outward, outspoken. He says a lot of things to the media. Laz, what's the motive to go on record and say something like this, that there is great concern when it comes to Max Verstappen?
Well, there is another thing about Helmut, and that's that he likes to say it like it is. So it's news to no one at Red Bull or anyone watching Formula One that Red Bull are not where they should be. And in the last year, there has been a pretty steep decline from winning almost every race in 2023 to starting the 24 season winning almost every race, and then to now where they're struggling to be right at the front. Of course, there was that Japan victory for Verstappen, a couple of weeks ago, but within the space of a week, they looked absolutely nowhere in Bahrain. And so Helmut said this after that race. Max struggled to sixth place. But I think there are other issues at play here that have not gone away over the past 12 months. And we know that in those 12 months, Helmut Marko and Christian Horner, there's been a bit of a power dynamic between the two, trying to ensure in both cases that they stay in their roles for very different reasons. But I think Marko has always been very closely aligned with Max Verstappen. And so everything that he says, you have to kind of take very seriously when he's talking about Max and concerns of losing him. But is it also perhaps a little dig at Horner, just as Red Bull are really starting to struggle with the performance of the car, to say, hey, look, that side's on you, get it sorted because I'm trying to keep Max at the team. You've got to get the car sorted. And is it more power politics at play? And I think that will become apparent over the next few races. But the key thing, which Max has made very clear, Max hasn't really talked about leaving the team or anything like that just yet. He would definitely be asked this weekend, but he hasn't really talked about that as yet. But the one thing he has consistently said is that the car is not where he wants it. He's not happy with it, and the team really needs to start to work together, because his only goal, it seems, when he turns up at a racetrack, is to work towards the defence of his title. And at the moment, he does not have a car capable of doing that.
I would say that winning heals cures all, right? And so when they're winning and you're at your best, everything looks like it's going well. Everybody's friendly. They love each other. They love working together. Nate, how would you describe Helmut Marko, Christian Horner's relationship during the winning days as compared to what you've seen now?
Massively different. And the winning days is a really good point, but also a key moment within that winning days, right in the middle of it, was when Dietrich Mateschitz died in October 22. And that was kind of, it wasn't really the peak for Red Bull, because 23 was also very dominant as well. But that was the moment that really created the power politics that Laurence just mentioned. Helmut Marko kind of drifted over to the Austria side. Then the Thai side have always been very close to Christian Horner. That's kind of the way Red Bull's set up. I think it's 51% is owned by the Thais, 49% is owned by Mateschitz and his family. And that really is underplaying every single thing that's happening at Red Bull at the moment. There's talk of the fact that, Marco's no longer really involved in driver decisions, but he is closely involved with the Max Verstappen stuff. So again, like Laurence was saying, anything Marko says has to be taken very, very seriously. But I mean, I've been in the Red Bull hospitality, and it can be weird. And and I think Laurence will attest to this as well. There's just a weird vibe down there, especially when Jos Verstappen's in town as well, because you have all of these big figures down at Red Bull, and you can tell they're just kind of like, they're side-eyeing each other. That there's an air. Someone, Marko will walk in or Horner will walk in, and you can see people tense up a little bit. There is a bizarre atmosphere down there, and you're absolutely right, Katie, because when they were winning, I think it kind of plastered over a lot of those cracks. But especially from about Miami onwards last year, obviously that's when we had the lead into that week, was that Nui was leaving, Lando wins, McLaren come with that big upgrade. The dynamic, and I think a lot of the things that had been papered over suddenly came to the surface, and they haven't really gone away since then. They've come more and more from the surface. So, I mean, Horner and Marko, I think have always kind of just coexisted. I think when Mateschitz was there, the thing he was very good at doing was getting the best out of those two, even if they didn't quite get along. Now, I think that, that has really kind of split open quite a lot more. And 12 months ago in Saudi Arabia, when I was there covering that race, we thought Max might be on the verge of leaving Red Bull as well, because there was talk of Marko leaving. And so the one thing that makes Marko incredibly powerful is that the only real thing he's done at Red Bull is, and this is multiple people at Red Bull have told me this, the only real thing he's done at Red Bull of any meaningful note for the past couple of years is specifically deal with Max and his contract, Max and, clauses and stuff like that. So that's really all he's there for. And so that's why if you take Marko out of the equation, Max is like, well, that's my safety blanket. I'm gone. So Marko, even though he seems very powerless on the outside, he still has this one big chip, and it probably is the most powerful bargaining chip in Formula One right now, right? Which is Max Verstappen, the best driver, I think, quite comfortably at the moment in Formula One, is kind of hanging by a thread at this team, and Marko seems to be the guy holding him there. And to that point, Laurence made very well, it was a dig at Christian, because I think as soon as Verstappen leaves, I don't see how even the Thai side of that power equation can look at anything other than saying, well, Horner's the guy that's let this guy walk through the door and leave. We have to change something up. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what's going on there. But yeah, it's. I think the bigger tension is Horner and Jos, but you can tell that Horner and Marko just, there's kind of this uneasy coexistence going on between them, which has been the case for a little while.
Well, let's follow that line of thinking. Okay, so if Max Verstappen were to leave Red Bull, what happens to the team? What happens to this dynasty that they've created behind one of the best drivers ever to involve himself in this sport, Laz?
I think the first thing you'd see, rather inevitably and obviously, is a slump in performance, because the one guy who's able to put that car at the sharp end of the grid is Max Verstappen. His teammates, be it Perez last year, Lawson at the start of the year, Tsunoda's been a little bit better, but probably still, not exactly where they need him to be. Clearly, that car is incredibly difficult to struggle with. Now, there's not really a suggestion that Max is going to walk out midway through the season, because, of course, there's nowhere to go. This is about 26, where he goes then. The other factor in all of this is where Red Bull are with their power unit for 26. Remember, they're building their own one as of next year. And so if that doesn't go to plan and the performance drops, then Max is probably, or if he knows the performance is going to drop already, if he's seen what problems they're facing with the power unit, then if Max leaves, then I think everything really does struggle. The question there is whether, the ownership say, right, Christian, you're responsible, out you go, and they go from absolutely zero and build everything back up, or it's whether they keep the faith in Christian and allow him to build it back up. But either way, I think you're looking probably at several years in the weeds a bit in Formula One before they can build something back up, because there's no obvious replacement for Max. I mean, if he went to Mercedes, that doesn't seem very likely right now, but if he did, then of course George Russell would be on the market, be an obvious replacement to go the other way. But it seems more likely that George is going to stay at Mercedes and Max maybe will look at Aston Martin. Now, if he goes to Aston Martin, he's probably going to end up replacing Fernando in some way. And it's whether Fernando would want to carry on, whether Red Bull would really think, bringing Fernando in, someone who they've got a bit of a checkered history with already, would make sense. So I think the only answer is, if Verstappen does leave, is that you've got to start from zero and build the team up and get the core principles in the right place. At the moment, we talk about this underperforming car. There are reasons. And the main fundamental reason is that it has this awful balance between corners. Red Bull have come up with solutions for that in the wind tunnel make sense, but as soon as they are put on the track, they no longer work. So there's a correlation issue between what they're seeing with their simulations and the wind tunnel and what they're seeing on track. They've got a new wind tunnel in the pipeline, but it doesn't come online until 2027. So I think everything, if Max did leave next year, would have to be based around rebuilding the team for 27, except that you're going to be a year away from the top of the competition.
You said start back at zero, get rid of Christian Horner, essentially clean house. Does that include Helmut Marko? If Max Verstappen leaves, do you get rid of them both?
Well, this is the other thing. As Nate said, Marko being so closely linked to Verstappen, I think if Christian were to stay, I think there'd be an argument for keeping him, because who are you going to replace him with? Then I think he would look to get rid of Marko. And without Max there, I think Marko would all of a sudden look very vulnerable in that position, because he's quite old as well. So, it would be a natural retirement. They could spin it in a nice way and all that kind of stuff. And he would almost certainly step aside. What would be interesting is if they did point the finger at Christian. I'm not saying they will, because I think Christian still has power within that team. As Nate said, still has power with the 51% Thai owners. But yeah, if they did keep Christian, then I think Marko's gone. If they get rid of Christian, then it'd be interesting whether Marko could hold a position. But even then, I think really the sensible thing would be to start from zero with someone new. But who that person would be is a difficult thing to answer as well.
Sure. Okay, so he's given us two examples of possible landing spots for Max Verstappen, being Aston Martin and Mercedes. Nate, I don't want to go down a deep, dark rabbit hole here, because this could take over our entire podcast. And we will likely have podcast episodes dedicated to where Max Verstappen can go. But just any other team outside of Aston or Mercedes that would come to mind that could possibly be a spot that he goes to?
Not for 26. I mean, those are the two obvious ones. The only other place you look at is you look at Lewis. He's on a 2-year contract at Ferrari. Does Ferrari look at it and say, okay, maybe we try and get Max for the end of that Lewis contract, but again, does Max stay around? So in the immediacy, I think it is Aston, and Mercedes is only an option as well, because Toto Wolff and George Russell haven't agreed an extension yet. As soon as that's on the table or that's done, then Aston is the only place really left for him straight away. So and that I think maybe plays into Red Bull's hands a little bit, is that the options he has are quite limited. But I think when you've got a guy like Max Verstappen, you have to consider that other teams probably might,
make some room.
Their thought process maybe changes to accommodate somebody like Max Verstappen in a way that it wouldn't for other drivers. So I think that the likes of Ferrari and McLaren look locked down for long term, but you just never know with Formula One, and it's so rare that a driver like Max Verstappen is available on the market. And I think a lot of teams look at that and say, well, look, we either get him or he goes to a rival for the next 5 years and wins championships with them. So that's the part of it that is interesting, is if other teams kind of change course with their future plans to accommodate Max. I think it was Alonso, wasn't it, Laz, in 2005? He won with Renault and he signed a contract for 2007 with McLaren, but then he still had the small matter of being there in 2006, a bit like what Lewis did with signing a deal down the line for Ferrari. So there is precedent for it. I'm not sure. I'm not saying Ferrari are in the mix or I've heard anything about that, but you could imagine a team like Ferrari saying, okay, well, if Max is available, let's try and get him. But yeah, the two obvious ones are Aston and Mercedes before that.
Okay, I'm not even gonna take the
Yeah.
bait there. Okay,
Like you
because
said, we can
we're
discuss
gonna go
another time.
down it, and
Yeah.
we're gonna derail this whole episode.
I
Okay, but
when you
that's
said it, I was
interesting.
like, I'm just gonna throw Ferrari in the mix and then see where we go.
No,
But yeah,
okay.
we'll park it. Yeah.
All right, not all doom and gloom though. Okay, Yuki scored some points in Bahrain. Right now, as it stands, in the constructors, Red Bull is third, 71 points. They're 80 points behind McLaren. In the drivers' championship, Max is currently third with 69 points. He's five behind Piastri and eight behind Lando Norris. So obviously, very much in the hunt there. Do you guys think that Red Bull has the opportunity and the ability to right the ship before summer break? I mean, we've still got a bit of time, Laz.
So there were meetings a couple of races ago, or between the races at Milton Keynes, which Max attended to try and understand how they can get this car where it should be in terms of, the feeling behind the wheel, the behavior in the corner, which at the moment Max is not happy about, and then also brakes was another issue, and then also that imbalance in the corners has led to excessive tire degradation. If they can find a solution to that, and that's not unheard of in Formula One, teams do bring updates that kind of resolve those kind of things, then yes, maybe. But they just seem so lost because of that reason I mentioned earlier, the lack of correlation, that perhaps the real, point where that car is probably where Yuki was in Bahrain. I mean, it was behind an Alpine and a Haas at the finish. I think they probably expect that they're the fourth best team overall, so ahead of those two. But yeah, that's probably where that car is on circuits, especially where tire degradation comes into play. I think faster circuits, like the one we're at this weekend, and also circuits where there's a smooth track surface, again, like the one we're at this weekend, they can kind of paper over the cracks a bit. And that's perhaps where Max needs to be better than ever. But I think the reality, once we get into the swing of Imola, a circuit where we've got Miami first, actually. Miami, where a few issues were surfacing last year. Imola, a track where, again, Max won, but it was only just, and already it was clear that there was issues with the car riding bumps. Monaco, it really struggled. Into those races, if they don't start to have solutions come into the car by that point, then you've got to start to wonder, because there comes a point in this season as well where you say, okay, we're onto a bit of a lost cause here, trying to develop a car that, everything we do isn't working. We need to maintain some attention on 2026 and make sure some of the resources are going there. So that will be the big juggling act for Red Bull. I don't think they'll give up, because if they give up, that will not go down with Max, and then we're back to that conversation we had at the start of the podcast about will Max leave or not. But yeah, they really need basically the next set of upgrades to change the behavior of that car. Otherwise, I don't think even Max Verstappen at his very best can beat Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in that McLaren, the way that McLaren's performing right now.
Of course, McLaren's been fantastic, and we're going to get there. But I also think George Russell has been on a tear since the beginning of the season. He found himself on the podium again in Bahrain. He's currently fourth in the Drivers' Championship with 63 points. Or can we talk about him being a legitimate threat for the Drivers' Championship, Nate? Is he the real deal? Could he be in contention when we get to the end of the season?
Yeah, 100%. I actually think George, if you look beyond Piastri, probably the superstar of the season so far. If you look at his results, the way he's driving, and the fact that, in every race he's been there or thereabouts in that mix. He's not always, looked like he could win maybe, but he's been in the podium contention. And yeah, I mean, it is remarkable on our when you look at the championship, you've got Max Verstappen is 8 points behind Piastri. Russell's not too far behind that either. So it proves the point we've been saying all year, that McLaren are going to run away with the Constructors' Championship. When you have two drivers that are basically taking points off each other, there is the door open for somebody else to come in. And Mercedes look good. They look like they're maybe the next quickest car consistently behind McLaren. And McLaren is the example every team should be looking at from last year. That step forward that you can make is tangible. Maybe less so this year because of 2026 and the focus on that. But all these teams are having to make the same call, aren't they? Is when do we fully turn everything to next year? And there's no guarantee next year as a championship, so it's such a difficult decision to make. And Russell, in a good way, has complicated that decision, I think, for Mercedes, because you look at it and you think, well, as long as he's in touching distance of that, I mean, both he and Verstappen could leave Saudi Arabia in the lead of the championship, if the results go the right way. And that, given the way the season's gone, is actually pretty remarkable. Just the fact that, it has seemed like such a McLaren cakewalk out in front. So I 100% think he can. And the fact that the McLaren drivers are so closely matched is perfect for Russell as well. It's the age-old story of teams fighting with two drivers. You're naturally, we saw it with McLaren in 2007 with Ferrari, opened the door for Kimi to win. It's a story that's not just closely associated with Formula One, but also with McLaren as well. So yeah, I 100% think so, and I think there's actually been a real level up from Russell. Last year he was driving really well, but it seems that without Lewis there, he's clearly made this step of, we always talk about, oh, you're kind of coming into the team leadership role. It does feel that Russell has embraced that in a massive way. He's obviously got Kimi there, who, as exciting as Kimi Antonelli is, you just have to look at his race results to see that it's going to be up and down. He's not the finished product yet. Russell is. And I think ever since Russell made those comments about Max last year, you feel like he's really had the bit between his teeth and he's like, I can win a championship. You just got to give me the car. And quietly, and so he was asked about this on Sunday in Bahrain, are you a championship contender? And he was like, no, I don't think it's too early for that. But you could see he's like, I'm not out of this yet. And I think that suits George Russell perfectly. He's always been kind of happy to, he was in the shadow of Lewis when he started out. I think he's always kind of been clawing for a bit of recognition. And this season, he deserves it so far based on what he's doing. So obviously as an outsider, but I think these next kind of couple months leading into the summer break will determine whether he's there. If he's still in touching distance come the summer break, I think you have to back him, just given how open that fight's going to be out in front.
You mentioned the growing rivalry between the two McLaren drivers, so let's go there. The stat of the week is brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Here's the stat. This is the sixth time McLaren has won 3 of the first 4 races of Formula One season. History being on their side, in each of the previous 5 seasons, McLaren won both the Drivers' and the Constructors' Championship. The last time it happened was in 1998. Having said that, with 2 wins under his belt, Laurence Edmondson, how much pressure is Oscar Piastri putting on Lando Norris?
A huge amount, because we can look at the championship as it stands, and there's a 3-point gap between them, and it's in Norris's favour. But if you look at the last 3 races, Piastri's outscored Norris by 20 points, because of course he lost all those points at that first race in Australia with that mistake. So if you just look at it purely on what those 2 drivers have done this year, and you exclude the moment when they both went wide into a rainstorm and kind of ended up on the gravel, and Piastri just got it slightly wider than Norris, then Piastri is by far the better driver of the 2 so far this year. Whether he can maintain that is one of the big questions about Piastri. It's one of the big questions we had going into this season. But he seems ice cold at the moment. His whole demeanour is just so focused and so unflustered and not even that excited anymore when he wins. And I think it just shows you how focused he is. I think Oscar Piastri probably never gets too excited about anything. But right now it's just so focused. And Lando's got to be concerned. He's got to be concerned about him. At the moment, if this trend continues, in a few races, he'll be about 17 points behind.
And on his persona as well, we're seeing the contrast between those 2 drivers laid bare, aren't we? I mean, you've got exactly what Laurence said. You've got this kind of ice-cold killer in Piastri, and then in the same car, and also a guy who's like, yeah, we do have the fastest car, quite clearly, we've got the fastest car. You've then got Lando Norris, who is kind of overthinking, over-answering questions, I think, kind of being very self-critical, is making all these little, there's these little mistakes. There's maybe, Bahrain, obviously, in Q3, the way that unraveled for him. So that's the opposite narrative, really, to what was happening in 2024. I know Norris made a lot of mistakes, but Piastri was the inconsistent one. And it just seems like Norris has just struggled to adapt to this new reality that they have now of, we have the best car. And if you guys go out and win every weekend, you're going to be champion, probably. So yeah, I think right now, if you were to bet money on it, I'm thinking back to our Vegas days when we were back in the casino, throwing money down randomly. But I think you'd say it's Piastri, right? Who can win from this point?
It's such an interesting dynamic because for so long, for all of Lando Norris's career, he's been chasing, right? He's been hunting. And now he's the one being hunted in the best car. And how does your mentality change, and how do you adapt and accept that? And can you perform knowing that everybody expects you to go out and win Grand Prix every time you step on the racetrack? Now your teammate obviously is more than capable of doing so right next to you. So it's just really fascinating, the psyche of what these guys go through, especially as the successes change for their teams.
What's frustrating with Norris as well is that we know he has the talent and the ability. It does just seem to be kind of these little mistakes creeping in. I think he's less comfortable with where the car is than Oscar is, or at least he's maybe given away a bit more time in lower speed corners than Oscar because of the issues that McLaren has. Is, we look at it and how fast it is compared to the competition, but it's still not an easy car to drive. In fact, none of the cars out there really are. So if he can get his head around that, I think that would be a big step towards it. But yeah, he has to be mentally resilient, and he has to just, from now on, almost like we're starting from zero again. We've done the first 4 races. 3 of them haven't gone brilliantly for Lando. And focus on, what went well in Australia as well. I guess China was the other one where maybe giving him a bit of a hard time because he had that brake issue and otherwise may have been able to attack Piastri at the end of the race. But still, yeah, I think Lando does already need a bit of a reset just with where he is mentally going into this championship. But he's got the ability, and that's the slightly frustrating thing about where he is right now.
I think the reset question is quite an interesting one because he was asked about this. I was just finding the quote from last week. In the press conference, he was asked, you're very self-critical. Is that something you can be to be a world champion? A journalist colleague of ours, Giles Richards, did a fantastic piece with Lando in Japan where he was like, I think you can be a nice guy and win championships. I'm not going to change my mindset. Norris kind of elaborated on that, and I thought this quote was really standout. He said, maybe sometimes I lack a bit of self-belief, and I have done in the past, but that's just me. It's what's made me as good as I am, and probably maybe at times has limited me from becoming a better driver, but I'm happy. And I thought it was a really interesting admission because it's really the first time Lando has said, like, yeah, this probably hasn't helped me, develop and or at least, iron out some of those mistakes. And I think Laurence is 100% right because you're now dealing with a guy who it does already seem to have lost that kind of boyish joy for winning because it's so routine for him, or it's like so routine in his head. So I think the way Lando responds to this now will be the making of him, the making or the breaking of him from this point, because the bar has already been raised. And I spoke to people at the end of last year about Lando versus Oscar, and I said, if you guys do have the best car next year, how do you foresee it going? And the consensus with everyone I spoke to was Oscar's ceiling is so high. It's whether he can get there next year or not. And it seems like who knows if this is his ceiling? Maybe there's more to come. But it seems that the improvements he's made have just been way bigger than Lando's. And I think Lando can be a world champion. I think Oscar can clearly be a world champion too. But they're both at very different points in their mindset, I think. And that's the telling thing. But that quote really stood out to me because I was looking at it, I was thinking, this is a guy who wants to win the world championship. And I've always actually kind of admired that about Lando. He's very open about mental health and stuff like that. But you do wonder, is that the kind of thing you can be saying every week and it not have an effect on you longer term? So maybe that's something he needs to reflect on this week and then, going into the races after Saudi.
The other pressure point here as well is that McLaren have this big advantage this year. Of course, we have this big rule set in 2026. Yeah. And while I think McLaren will continue to be a front-running team, I think a lot of the people they have in there are absolutely fantastic and they've done a great job of putting it all together. There's no guarantee going into that year because, the engine plays a bigger part. It looks like they're going to have the best engine in Mercedes, but they might not have the best integration because Mercedes is going to have a head start on them with that kind of stuff. So it just adds that extra pressure. Will either of these drivers in their career get another opportunity like this where they have a car advantage like they have right now? And then I don't know how much they dwell on that. They probably don't think about that. If I was advising them, I'd say, definitely don't think about that. It's not the kind of thing that's going to help you out here, but it's got to be at the back of the mind, hasn't it? That this is such a great opportunity for both of them to get that first title for both of them. Lando's so much more experienced, but still would be the first title for either of them. That would be such a big deal for them going into this year. And I just think Oscar has the ability to block out all of that noise more than Lando.
It's not that you want to say it's a small window of opportunity, but nothing's guaranteed, to your point. So you don't know how things are going to go in 2026 when the regulations change. So you want to be able to capitalize on the opportunity right in front of you where you clearly have the best car on the grid. Nate, to your point, asking that question, does it weigh on you? Is Lando somebody capable of being self-critical and that negativity building up and managing it? Depends on who you are, right? It depends on the type of athlete you are. I think about Michael Jordan, he used to fabricate shit out of thin air just to get himself going before a game. He would come up with random quotes that a competitor did not say just to get the locker room going and get himself motivated. He could handle negative shit like that. Michael Jordan, I think we can all agree, is one of the greatest athletes to ever walk this earth and is in his own world when it comes to that kind of stuff mentality wise. I don't know if Lando Norris is somebody that can mentally handle kind of cutting himself down weekend after weekend over the course of a season.
Yeah, it's a really good point about Michael Jordan. And also, like, let's look at Lewis. I mean, Lewis is somebody who's very capable of going from extreme highs of emotion to this is the worst thing that's ever happened. I can't believe I'm driving, I can't drive anymore, stuff like that. But Lewis has always been able to kind of marry those things together, hasn't he? And say, like, the lows almost push him up to those highs. And with Lando, we haven't fully seen that yet. I mean, to Lando's credit, there were a few moments last year where he did kind of come back from quite a bit of criticism and then drove very well. Singapore, he dominated. Abu Dhabi was the big one that stood out to me, was when Oscar got spun around by Max. Lando went and drove flawlessly out in front when if he'd lost a position, McLaren lose the constructors. So we have seen it. It's just, yeah, that point of can it fuel you to be better? That's my doubt with him. And I think that you can also look at someone like, we just saw McIlroy win the Masters. I've just been reading about all the pressure that McIlroy's taken on over the years.
10 years. 11 years.
And and he was even admitting on Sunday night after winning the Masters, like, there were some times when I didn't deal with criticism or hardships the right way, and it spiraled for a few majors or a few seasons or whatever. And and Laurence is completely right about 2026. Norris might not have a second stab at this, at least not anytime soon. So he can't let it be something that he works on over a couple of months. It's got to be very quick, got to be immediate. But we haven't seen that from him so far. So I think to make that change is going to be very difficult for him. At least in the short term, anyway.
Yeah, I also think too, Laz brought up the point of, can Oscar Piastri maintain this level throughout the course of the season? That's something that we're going to have to wait and see. But, Red Bull as a team proved last season that a lot can change over 24 races. So to that point, I mean, maybe something could change for McLaren. Who would be ready, Laz, in the wings, waiting to kind of take over from McLaren? Who can stop them, if anyone?
Well, that's a very good question, because I think all the teams behind are dealing with slight issues here and there. You might even say Mercedes. I mean, slight recency bias based on how well Russell performed in Bahrain. But, it seems like the car with the least unknowns around at the moment, which is a new thing for Mercedes because they've been dealing with that for a long time. I think, the big question for McLaren going forward is how much the changes in Spain to the flexibility tests on the wings is going to hurt them. Red Bull started the season saying that they felt that McLaren were going to be particularly hurt by that, whereas they don't think they will be. Only time will tell on that, but that's the only thing where I think perhaps it could change things around. But then again, like you said, Red Bull was that great example. This time last year, to go back to the stat that we started this segment on, they'd won 3 of the last 4 as well, and they didn't go on and win the championship. But usually if you win 3 of the first 4 races, then you're in a very good position to go and dominate the rest of the season. So I think where McLaren are now, they just seem to be in this real swing of, bringing performance to the car. They brought another serious amount over the winter, but also the changes they made over the winter weren't just aimed at immediate performance in Australia for the first race. It was also about having a little bit of extra ceiling to develop into. So I don't think we've seen the best of the McLaren yet. So I really do feel that they've got the ball in their court. Perhaps if they drop the ball, somebody else could sneak in, but it's not immediately obvious who it would be because all those other teams are dealing with probably bigger issues than McLaren are right now.
Let's shift gears and look ahead to Jeddah, our upcoming race. Laz, we're going to do a track breakdown with you, of course. I want to know type of track, type of racing, what changes have been made, if any?
So it's very fast track, and it's well, they call it a street track. It's not really. It's purpose built. It doesn't really get used by buses in the week and stuff like that. But the walls are very close, so there's not much space for mistakes. As I mentioned, it's very smooth track surface, fast corners. I think this could be a circuit where Red Bull, like I said, can paper over the cracks a little bit, get a little bit closer to McLaren. Certainly in Max's hands, there's that potential just to be there. In terms of changes for this year, I'm not aware of any to the track. But the tyres are different. They've already brought softer tyres this year. So you can expect maybe a little bit more degradation. Degradation was never really an issue there. That's good news for the racing, but actually that's going to work against Red Bull because Red Bull are really struggling to keep their tyres in a sensible place over race distances, and that's where a lot of the performance is leaking away, and that's what we saw in Bahrain. So how each of the teams approach strategy will be interesting because it's a slightly new challenge for them this year. You know, they've got those softer tyres and getting their head around all of that. So I'm hopeful that we'll get a better race, but it's not always one where there's easy overtaking either. There's 3 DRS zones, but there aren't that many big braking points. So it's not always that easy to find a way past the car in front.
I have to be honest, I wasn't really listening to your breakdown because I was thinking
Right.
Unlapped is presented by Oracle, our title sponsor. But I was thinking of what other brands, nerdy brands, could we get to sponsor Laz's track breakdown? Nerd Wallet came to mind. Geek Squad came to mind.
Pirelli tires, maybe, you know, they'll get a mention quite often.
But it has to be a nerdy brand, Laz, and I mean that in
Okay.
the most loving of ways. Does it favor anybody? Does it favor any of these teams? Does it not favor a specific team? Somebody's going to definitely struggle.
I think if we're going to compare it to a track we've seen already this year, maybe Suzuka's the closest one, just because of the high-speed nature of some of the corners. And from there, you know, you can see that maybe, you know, Ferrari didn't ever get to where they wanted to be in Suzuka. But I don't know. I feel like it's a different enough challenge, and we're still so early in the season that the teams can spring surprises. I don't think we're going to have a huge amount of updates to cars, maybe a few little kind of circuit-specific things. We'll have to wait a little bit later for that. So any car that's been good in high speed so far this year should be fairly good round here.
Speaking of Ferrari, I think it's fair to say that Lewis Hamilton hasn't necessarily performed to the level fans would have hoped for in the first few races. Nate, what are our expectations for Lewis and Jeddah?
It's a really difficult one to make sense of. Not make sense of, to gauge, I think, because Lewis had just a classically Lewis weekend in Bahrain, where, you know, on Saturday he gave us some of the briefest answers I've ever seen Lewis give in a media session. Just wasn't happy. Then in the race, I really think if that safety car hadn't come out in Bahrain, he or Charles could have pushed to be on the podium. Like, they were flying when that happened. They were on an offset strategy to everyone else. Ferrari had actually done a really good job of the strategy calls there. And Lewis said that middle stint before the safety car came out was the most aligned he'd felt with the car at any point since he joined, including when he got that sprint win in China. And actually, if you look at his pace then, it was super close to Charles. They were both moving through the order really, really quickly. So it did feel like there was a moment there, you know, a tangible moment where for the first time Lewis said, look, I am actually kind of getting a handle on this car now. He said on Sunday that everything is still alien to him. You know, the brake, it's the first time he's gone away from the Brembo brakes that Mercedes use. There's a different brake manufacturer that Ferrari use. He's using engine braking a lot more through corners, which maybe that's a segment for Lawrence's nerd hour or whatever we name it. But what he said is the way he's driving the car with Ferrari is still fundamentally different to the way he's ever driven a Formula One car. And even for a guy like Lewis, that's taking time to get used to. I do think we're starting to see Lewis settle into his skin a bit more at Ferrari. You know, you can see the gaps are coming down to Charles.
Yeah.
You know, the pace during races just seems to be a bit more consistent. And you can look around the grid. Everyone who's moved teams has struggled a little bit. I mean, Sainz is another good example at Williams. So I think there's some real reasons to be encouraged there. I don't think we're in a position yet where Ferrari are going to be doing what George Russell's doing and constantly be up there for a podium. They just seem to be lacking a certain something when it comes to that. But like I said in Bahrain, they could have been up there had things gone differently. So I think there's reasons to be optimistic. The sad thing about Lewis is we all came into this season thinking this could be a championship season. And very quickly it was like, okay, well, he hasn't even had a podium in a Grand Prix yet. So the expectations have had to be lowered down. And I think that, you know, part of the story of Ferrari is always how quickly does that start to grate on the great drivers, you know, that have gone to Ferrari, had this big dream move. How quickly does the dream evaporate? I don't think the dream's even started to fade away yet, but I think that reality has hit Lewis quite hard over the past couple of weeks. And yeah, I think not just for him, but also for the Tifosi and for his fans as well. But I'm still confident. I mean, you don't look at Lewis driving and think, oh, he's completely lost it. There's nothing there.
Sure.
He looks like somebody who is fundamentally struggling to get a handle on the car and adapt to it and get used to it. But I don't think there's any reasons for alarm bells just yet. And I think he'll keep getting better. And, you know, we've got a run of circuits coming up soon that, you know, I think the Ferraris can be competitive in, like Laurence said. So Yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, it'd be great to see him on the podium, and same with Charles as well, because we've kind of
Yeah.
forgotten about Ferrari this year already, which is a shame.
Speaking of teams that we've necessarily forgotten about, if Jack Doohan doesn't perform in Jeddah, Laz, do you see Alpine possibly making a change before the Miami Grand Prix?
No, the pressure seems to be off slightly there. I haven't found out myself. I wasn't in Bahrain, but there are reports that he's now got until the summer to continue to show what he can do. I think there's been some pretty big errors. I mean, the Japan practice accident with the DRS open into turn one springs to mind, but there's also been a few glimpses, I think, in Bahrain as well, that perhaps he's made a step. And while there were a lot of speculation ahead of the year that Miami would be the switch point where they're pulled Doohan out the car and put Colapinto in, it feels like that's eased slightly. And kind of the more we've kind of looked at that, the more it seems to be coming from kind of the Colapinto Argentina camp than maybe the team itself. And the team have been quite defensive about it. They also haven't ruled it out, which makes, I think anyone, but certainly journalists think, well, this is still very much on the cards. But it does seem like there's been a bit of a reprieve and that Jack Doohan might get a few more races just to prove what he can do. And I kind of hope he does, because if this was his last race, I feel like there'd still be that question of, was there actually something better there that could have shown itself over the next kind of 4 or 5 races into the summer?
Could I just ask real quick, because Colapinto's dad, he posted something on social media and then quickly took it down, which then kind of fueled these rumors that maybe we would see Colapinto in Miami. When your reserve driver is kind of fueling the fire and helping the rumor mill get going, like as a team, is that just so annoying? Like, how do you douse that? Are you like, yo, get your house in line? We can't be having these distractions. How do you handle that?
Well, the team can only blame themselves, because they're the ones that they started this all by bringing in a
Yeah.
very capable driver from a rival team. He was at Williams as reserve, obviously, after being at Williams last year, and brought him in with no other real reason, it seemed, other than to give him a chance in the car at some point this year. So I think the team can't be that upset about it. And because there's all these kind of rumours washing around, you do wonder what was said to Franco at the start of the year as well. Another thing which James Vowles, who of course let Franco go. In fact, they haven't actually completely released Franco from the Williams contract. There is a piece of string where they can pull him back down the line, which I find interesting. But the main reason that James Vowles gave for allowing Franco out of his Williams reserve duties and to go to a rival team as a reserve driver was because he thought that it was his best chance of getting race time this year. So even James Vowles, who was a crucial part of that deal, of course, was saying that. So, there again, we talked about smoke and fire, and there's no smoke without fire when we're talking about Max at the start of this podcast. And the same is true there. It just seems like perhaps in Bahrain, I mean, Nate may be able to talk about this better because he was actually there, but it seemed like the mood music just slightly changed around Jack and it became a little bit more positive. I don't know, Nate, was that the case? Was that the feeling there?
Yeah, a little bit. And I think that, and we spoke about this in Japan, didn't we? That a big red flag around Colapinto was when it was breaking in the days after what was the second race? China. Feels like it was ages ago. In the days after that, when it was breaking, that Lawson was going to be losing his seat and Tsunoda was going to come up. This report surfaced in Argentina that got a lot of journalists in Argentina very excited that Red Bull was signing Colapinto and just sacking Lawson outright. And I remember seeing that at the time, and that's a very strange move because that's an expensive move for Red Bull to make. Didn't really make sense. They could just drop Lawson as they did. Did some kind of calling around about that, and it was complete BS. and it clearly had come from one place. It clearly come from the Colapinto camp, putting that in there to say, like, almost, I think, to Alpine, like, look, Red Bull want him. Yeah, Red Bull might get him as well. And I think that was a bit of a red flag for a lot of people. It was kind of like, okay, that seems to have come from, A, the Colapinto side, and then B, I think Argentina are desperate to have Colapinto back on the grid for obvious reasons. Like, he's become a little mini star over there already. And then I think that you look at what's happened with Alpine, and Laurence is completely right. I mean, Alpine have completely made this situation themselves. Ollie Oakes has had so many opportunities to shut it down. He never has. But yeah, in Bahrain, you started to hear that, okay, Jack's got a bit more time, which I'm still not sure about because Doohan's, the mistakes have been there. But yeah, the threat of him going now does seem much less than it did a couple of weeks ago. There's the Briatore factor there, who obviously has had a stake in Doohan's career for a while, but also is just famous for being very, very ruthless when it comes to these decisions. So, from what I understand, there is a provision in Colapinto's contract that he will race at some point this year. But again, I now doubt where that's come from and the validity of that. You don't know. But yeah, certainly Doohan, the pressure on him seems to be off, and he does seem a bit more relaxed, a bit calmer when he's talking to the media now. I think that threat internally seems to have dissipated, at least for the short term as well. But yeah, very strange one to monitor. And who knows? I think genuinely he could have a terrible weekend in Japan, and then suddenly the question goes back to Alpine, like, well, okay, are you keeping this guy in the car, or are you going to go to this kind of this young driver that you signed with the specific reason of putting him in the car when Doohan is no longer up for it? So, and also to that point about Alpine creating this problem, you wonder how many of these mistakes Doohan would be making if he didn't have Colapinto waiting behind him in the waiting in the wings and being like, oh, the ready-made replacement for this guy is there. So the whole thing is just, it's kind of classic Alpine, really, isn't it? Just managed in a terrible way and quite confusing. And I think that they've not really ever got on top of it. So I'm the same as Laurence. I hope he gets more time. I think that there's been glimpses there. There's been a few moments through some races where you're like, okay, something there, but the mistakes have to be cut out for sure.
I did not sit down in this chair to start this pod to spend a lot of time talking about a reserve driver, but this is just the last thing that I'll say about Colapinto. I think you have to be careful whether it's coming from him or he knows about these, things being said in back channels by his camp. Like, you can be Max Verstappen and have your people fuel rumors like in the media because you're the greatest driver on the grid. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if your actions right now and your camp's actions would make a team jump to get you. Like, I just think that that's a lot of extra nonsense that I don't want to deal with if I'm a team principal. And not that obviously he wants to get on the grid for Alpine, but you're also auditioning for other teams in the future. And the way that you manage yourself and your team, I think is really important. And do people want to work with you or not? And I wouldn't love the way that Colapinto's group's going about this through back channels and trying to spread things into the media that are false, to your point.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Katie. I think that's a really important point. And also, I think this is so often the case with young drivers. I mean, broaden this conversation a bit beyond just Colapinto, is that the driver doesn't always have a huge amount of control over it. These guys are very young, They've been backed by people with huge amounts of money to get to where they get to. Karting, junior formula, it's all really expensive. And all these people that have put money into your career, or all these sponsors that have come on board along the way, they want kind of results, and they want their driver in F1 now. And sometimes they will go way over the top. I completely agree. And kind of lose sight of the bigger picture, perhaps lose sight of exactly what their driver can do as well. Because remember, the other issue is Franco had some pretty big errors at Williams, towards the end of last year. He started off very strongly. I do believe he deserves a place in F1. I think he's an F1 quality driver. But imagine then going into that position and you've got all that pressure created by, people kind of talking you up and kind of boosting you over the guy you're replacing and all this kind of stuff. So I think, I don't think it's coming from Franco himself. It's coming from the people around him. And I just hope that they temper it a little bit because, as you say, you've got to play a long game with these things. For
sure, because sometimes the help that you think you're doing now is actually going to be a disservice in the long run to the driver.
Absolutely.
Okay, with that, and we'll put a bow on our Colapinto conversation. Thanks for indulging me there. Podium predictions, which I have to say I have not been as involved as I would like, and I don't even think that I received texts from Dave Presley to submit my podium predictions on the weekend. So that's going to change considering I am dead last with 1 point. But let's get our podium predictions, and then I'll tell you where everybody stands. Nate, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I am going to say, we alluded to it earlier. Are we going third to first again? I've forgotten which way we go around now. So I'm going to put third place, Charles Leclerc.
Okay.
Second place, I'm going to put George Russell. And then first place, I'm going to put Oscar Piastri.
Wow. Where did Lando go?
I think we're going to, I think Lando, I don't think Lando's in the right headspace at the moment. I'd love to be proved wrong, but I just.
Oh my gosh, I'm starting to sweat.
I've got a bad, like they say in Star Wars, I got a bad feeling about this.
All right, Laz.
Okay. I'm going to go slightly the other way. I'm going to say Oscar Piastri in third place.
Okay.
Max Verstappen with a remarkable performance, dragging that Red Bull around to second. And Lando Norris, countering what Nate just said, because I think we've had too many similar predictions in this podcast so far.
I think last week we all were Piastri win, weren't we? So
yeah. We were all right, but yeah, still.
Yeah.
I think Lando Norris to win. Similar to Suzuka again, he kind of just had the edge over Oscar. Oscar made some mistakes there as well. So yeah, I'm going to say Lando wins this and puts his season a little bit back on course. We need that as well at this stage of the year.
Okay,
Yes.
well, I need to get back on course, so I'm going to go Oscar Piastri. Oh, so wait, sorry, I got to go through. I got to ascend.
3, 2, 1.
Third, P3, George Russell. Second, Lando Norris.
Nice.
First, Oscar Piastri.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I've been very harsh on Lando not putting him on the podium, but I'm just trying to spice things up, you know.
Yeah, well, you did, and let's see where you are, and if you're allowed to spice things up. Okay, here's a quick.
Well, if I get 0 points, I'm going to go back to boring for the Miami GP.
Okay,
I think.
Fair enough. As of last week, Laz, you got 1 point for picking Oscar Piastri to finish.
Very nearly, can I just say, very nearly got all 3 right. Had Lando Norris passed George Russell, as he was so close to doing, I would have had a perfect podium prediction.
Okay, if we want us to add an asterisk next to
Didn't,
we
No,
can't.
no.
We did it.
Just put it out there now, because
You almost had it.
I'll never get the credit for that, but just put it out there.
Nate also got 1 point for picking Oscar Piastri to correctly win. Nicole got 2 points because she had Oscar and Lando in their rightful spaces. So, standing show. Nicole is in the lead with 3 points. You both are tied with 2 points. I am behind with 1 point, but I've only entered 1 entry, and I feel pretty strong about that. So I'm 1 for 1 in getting a point. Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
Everybody feels good?
Yes.
See where we stand after Jeddah. So good to see you guys. So happy to do this again with you both.
Great to see you as well, Katie.
Yeah,
Enjoy your time off. Enjoy Jeddah. We'll see you obviously next week. Thank you for listening and watching. Remember, leave us a comment and hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to ESPN F1 for more F1 content. And if you're listening, please hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Unlapped is, of course, presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Cheers, guys.